very strong message here on Long Island and our region throughout the entire state. I'll tell you, since I announced my campaign for governor, as I've been traveling all throughout New York, many areas of the state I've been to, in that county, in that community, the largest issue for people all across the entire spectrum, right to left, conservative to liberal, Republican and Democrat, they're telling me that they support repealing cashless bail. They share stories about how cashless bail in their county has eroded public safety. They share individual stories where people who were let loose immediately went out and committed additional offenses. I'll give you just a few of the examples. Just recently, 2 weeks ago, in Yonkers, someone was arrested for a double homicide right after being released from arson. New York City, a serial bank robber was arrested after allegedly robbing 4 banks. Because of the state's cashless bail law, he was set free. Within 5 hours of his release, he was reported to have struck again, robbing banks in Manhattan and Brooklyn. Here on Long Island, William Floyd Parkway, we witnessed a local man with an ever-growing rap sheet charged with killing a 27-year-old man while driving drunk. But despite his 6 felony convictions, 6 misdemeanor convictions, and more, the driver was released the same day without bail. The judge said he couldn't even issue an ankle monitor under the cashless bail law. In Queens, New York City, a man charged with mugging an 83-year-old woman in Queens with reportedly at least 14 prior arrests was set free under the new law. Apparently, it wasn't until the officers, enraged by his release, began looking further into his background and found he was on parole for a prior burglary that he was arrested and held. In the New York City subway, a man attempted to attack a woman in a subway bathroom. As it turns out, he was released from jail 2 weeks prior to the new cashless bail law after being arrested for burglary. These stories exist all throughout the entire state of New York. These were told when they were thinking about passing the state's cashless bail law in Albany as the consequences that were likely if this law was passed and went into effect. What we are seeing now is exactly the consequences that so many warned those in power in Albany was going to happen. We're seeing the impacts with the crime statistics as well. From 2019 to 2020, violent crime went up. Violent crime with a firearm went up. Property crimes went up. As we await the data for 2021, it's likely that these numbers are going to continue to increase. As I said earlier, last Tuesday, a message was sent by voters in this state. On a number of issues, there are people who are unhappy with the direction they're seeing in government. But they are specifically also talking to us from all across New York about how they believe that the state's cashless bail law needs to be repealed. We're joined here today by a number of members of the Suffolk Senate and Assembly delegation. These are men and women who you'll hear from in a moment. We're at the tip of the spear right now up in Albany, fighting to immediately repeal this cashless bail law. It's important for those in power right now, from the governor of the state of New York, to the supermajority Democratic Assembly and Senate, the one-party rule that exists, that they do the right thing. If they don't, just like a lesson was learned for others who were on the ballot last Tuesday, they will learn their lessons at the ballot box November 8, 2022. Because this is a representative government. We live in a state and in a country where when people rise up and demand action, they demand supporting law enforcement more, not less. And there's no better example that they point to than the need to repeal cashless bail. If you don't heed their calls, they are going to make you pay a price at the ballot box, and guarantee you that will happen November 8, 22 if they don't take action. And I thank the senators and assemblymen who are here. But first, I would like to call up the district attorney to be the new district attorney elected last Tuesday here in Suffolk County. Ray Tierney is an experienced prosecutor. He has dedicated so much of his life towards this profession, towards justice, towards making sure that people who are responsible for MS-13 crimes, people who are responsible for drug trafficking crimes, are held accountable for those crimes. And it's a cause that he has dedicated his life towards. And now he takes on this new position as a district attorney here in Suffolk. I'd like to congratulate Ray for his win. But most importantly, I want to congratulate the residents of Suffolk County and the residents of Nassau County. Nassau County and Eddie Donnelly was elected as well last Tuesday. And what we heard in both races all across Long Island and Suffolk and Nassau is that the voters reject cashless bail and they demand that action be taken immediately by the state legislature. Ray, congratulations, and please share a few words.
Thank you, Congressman, and thank you all for coming. I think we had the election, and of course, criminal justice reform and bail reform was a huge issue in that in those elections. And what we saw is we saw suddenly, our elected officials coming to the realization that bail reform and criminal justice reform did not keep us safe and was not an effective law. And I just want to applaud Congressmen and the other elected officials because they sounded the alarm early and often with regard to that law, and that's what needs to be done. And when you look at criminal justice reform and bail reform, individually, these laws are ineffective and don't help to keep our citizens safe. But when you look at the slate of criminal justice reform as a whole, and taken as a whole, that's really a disaster. So we're talking about criminal justice reform. Down the line, you hear about the less is more law, okay, with eliminating the ability of parole officers to revoke parole on parolees. And that's a law that doesn't keep us safe. We got to talk about it. The elder parole law with mandatory parole hearings at 55 no matter what. This is an ineffective law that doesn't keep us safe. The clean slate law, where you expunge all records of imprisonment. Of conviction between 3 and 7 years. Expungement means permanently eliminating data such as fingerprints and DNA. This law is a disaster. This law will not help to keep us safe. And really, the proposed reforms go on, and we really need, as a group, as this group behind me is law, we need to say, because the proponents will tell you that these laws make us safer. We're here to tell you these laws do not make us safer, and we need to repeal some of these laws and move back and think about the victims and the victims' families when we consider criminal justice reform. So again, thank you to Lee Zeldin, and thank you to everyone who came today.
Congratulations again, Ray. The Dean of the Suffolk County delegation in the New York State Senate, and a longtime champion of this cause to get our police, our law enforcement supported more, not less. New York State Senator Phil Boyle.
Thank you, Congressman Zeldin, District Attorney-elect Tierney, my colleagues in government. We did have a big red wave last week. It was all about bail reform and criminal justice reform. Everybody we spoke to on the streets, that was their number one concern. So we saw what happened on election night. A lot of long-time, not just new Democrat candidates, but long-time serving legislators lost their seats because the people do not feel safe. I have to say that when we go back to Albany, we're going to say this is the number one issue. I looked at the tweets that night thinking the Democrats might be saying, maybe we went too far. No, they were doubling down. They say we did not go far enough. 55 and older law, bail reform, discovery reform, all these things. You know what they all have in common? They protect the criminals and not the victims. It's not going to happen anymore. I look forward to getting these laws changed, and if we don't, and when we do, we're going to have a new governor in the mansion up there, Lee Zeldin, and our great district attorney, Ray Tierney, going up to fight for our cause. Thank you.
Next, I would like to introduce the state senator where I live, State Senator Alexis White.
Thank you, Congressman Zeldin, and congratulations to our DA Ray Tierney. Very proud day in Suffolk County. And so we have an opportunity to repeal and replace this disastrous bail reform. Both Governor Hochul and Mayor-elect Adams have said changes need to be made, and we heard that just after Election Day last week. But the governor said that the changes she will propose will only be done behind closed doors with the legislative leaders. That's the majority of the Assembly and of the Senate. And once again, that's the wrong approach, and that's how we got into this mess in the first place. These conversations need to be held out in the public with all parties sitting at the table. Law enforcement, prosecutors, defense attorneys, victims advocates, and reform advocates. And this needs to be done in order to make sure that we have a cohesive plan that actually works and doesn't cost the taxpayers millions of dollars and have less safety. And so with that in mind, I look forward to a new governor next year.
My friend, State Senator Mario Matera.
Thank you, Congressman. I thank you very, very much for holding this press conference. Very important. And I just want to congratulate our new district attorney, Ray Tierney. You're so exciting. And Andy Donnelly also, too. Now, just think about something with this happening. We could talk about red wave. We could talk about this. No, the people spoke. They want to make sure that we have the right people in place that are going to do the jobs for our residents and keep us safe. You know what? Just think about Ithaca, New York. Perfect example. Ithaca, New York goes and they abolish the police force. Abolish the police force. We have a mayor up there. People vote in elected officials to do what's right for us. To what? To have social workers? Social workers to do the job of our police officers. You know, I will commend the new mayor-elect to say, guess what? He wants to reform. No, this has to be repealed. Bail reform, 50A, defunding our police, it needs to be repealed. Let's get our district attorneys. Let's get our police commissioners. Let's get our union leaders with the police together at the table and our judges so they can get back the discretion that they deserve to make sure they can do their job. Those are the people that sit at the table and to make up the laws for us elected officials. Those are the people that are going to tell us this needs to be done. As a union leader for a lot of years, I sat down across and negotiated a lot of contracts to sit there. But you listen to what's out there with general contractors say, okay, here's the jobs, this is what we need to do. These are the professionals. Again, our DAs, police commissioners, union leaders with police, and our judges. They know what to do. So you know what? I am going to be here. We're going to be up in Albany, and it's amazing what's going to be happening right now. If there's not going to be any changes in this next year. Let's see what the Democrats are going to do. Let's see, because they want to get reelected. But you know what? It's too late. They already did this. And you know what? Now we need to get the proper people. We need to make sure that Congressman Zeldin is going to be our next governor, New York State, to make sure that we're protected every day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mario, and somebody with a tremendous amount of experience with the law. Decades of experience, State Senator Tony Palmer.
Thank you, Congressman. And at the risk of being a little bit redundant, I certainly want to congratulate the District Attorney-elect Ray Tierney. Ray and I were prosecutors together within the same bureau in Suffolk County. And so I'll indicate, I think, the lesson that we should all think about. Because as mentioned by all the previous speakers, we've spoken the language of politicians on last Tuesday. We had great candidates like Ray Tierney, but I was on the floor of the Assembly as the ranking Republican on the Judiciary Committee, and then again as the ranking Republican now on the Codes Committee, dealing with all the criminal justice reform. And I brought up all these issues. When we first passed it, I said manslaughter in the second degree is a non-violent felony, mandatory bail. And we got some stories, and either they didn't know or intentionally ignored it. And I think it's the latter. There's some real smart legislators, obviously on both sides of the aisle. And then there was a quick, minor tweak a few months later. they've ignored it. They've continued to ignore it. We've said this numerous times. We've said it at a press conference on the floor of the Senate, on the floor of the Assembly, publicly. This needs to be changed. It's dangerous. And because of these lofty progressive movements, they thought they'd be okay. And guess what? People have spoken. They finally remember victims. Like in any good government situation, there are two sides of every coin. But they forgot about those victims. I've spent many hours sitting with rape victims, with families of homicide victims. So they've been forgotten by these two majorities. And shame on them. Shame on them. And you know what? They've finally gotten the message because all they care about is power and to stay in office and maintain their position. That didn't happen because the people have spoken. The people are smart. They get it because they're the ones that are dealing with the crime wave that we're all suffering under right now. So I hope and pray that this continues. I hope that we have some common sense and some balance in government. And our good friend, Congressman Zeldin, is on the second floor to make things right. Because we need to do that. We can't ever forget the victims again.
Thank you, Senator. Next we'll hear from Assemblywoman Jody Giglio.
So the basics of government are public health, safety, and welfare. And with the bail reform and the new discovery laws, neither the victims or the witnesses are safe. We see women getting raped on subways and witnesses not saying anything about it. They fear. They fear that their names, their addresses are going to be given out to the defense attorneys and that they will be visited. It's not right what's happened. We need to repeal it completely. We need to start all over. I agree with my colleagues. We need to get everybody sitting down at the table and come up with something that makes sense. Should somebody be in jail for a long time because of a backtrack? No. But the repeat offenders need to be behind bars. And the judges need that jurisdiction back. So we have to put it back in the laps of the judges who know best where these criminals belong. And we need to start working together right away, across the aisles, and make it happen sooner than later. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Next we'll hear from Assemblyman Joe DeStefano.
Congressman Zeldin, congratulations again to District Attorney-elect Tierney. Just a quick story first, and then we'll say my feelings on it. Last year ago, December, we had one of our colleagues up in the Hudson Valley area tell us a story about how a woman was walking on the side of the road, was run over by someone and killed. The person that was arrested for the crime was actually home having breakfast with his family before the family was even notified that the woman that was killed on the side of the road was notified, that the family was notified. What does that tell you about the bail reform? Funny thing happened on the way to getting this law passed, okay? As soon as it started to roll out and people were getting arrested on certain crimes, they said, oh my God, we got a problem here. We got to do something. So immediately they started to try and reform everything. Well, that didn't work out because nothing really changed. We need to repeal this law. No more reform, repeal. That is the only thing that's going to make sense. And, you know, we always hear about New Jersey. New Jersey was one of the formers of this law. And what happened was they said it took 3 years for their law to become effective. We rushed it through within a year. That was done. Why don't we just take a page and slow down a little bit and see how it works in other places? Then maybe we can get some ideas that make things that make sense. We do things in the state that don't make sense. And now we need to repeal it, get done with it, and repeal next year, and pray next year that we have new leadership in all way that's going to make it happen. So thank you.
Next we hear from New York State Assemblyman Doug Smith.
Thank you so much, Congressman. I just want to take a moment and reflect on what happened last Tuesday. The voters of Suffolk County overwhelmingly elected Ray Tierney as our next district attorney because he crisscrossed Suffolk County and let the people know that he disagrees with what happened with this bail reform law and that it's not right for politicians in Albany to substitute their poor judgment for the judgment of the women and men in the building behind me, our judges, who have the ability and have the knowledge to set bail and keep our community safe. Overwhelmingly, Ray Tierney was elected. If you look at the results across the state, New York City, in areas across the state that typically vote Democrat, there was a Republican surge of voters. People want a change, and we will see that 1 year from today when we elect our next governor, Zeldin.
Thank you, Assemblyman
hit by a drunk driver while putting out road flares recently, who's in a coma right now. The drunk driver who hit him is out on bail, was released without bail, and he's still in a hospital bed fighting for his life. Now, anyone who is running for governor next year, be it Kathy Hochul, Letitia James, or Lee Zeldin, only one of them has committed to fighting back against the progressives out of New York City and other urban areas throughout the state and repealing bail reform. I don't know that Letitia James wants to do it. I don't know that Kathy Hochul wants to do it. And I don't trust any of them to fight back against the radical progressives. I don't think New Yorkers will either. That's why this red wave is going to continue for next year, and we're going to put Lee Zeldin in the governor's base. So thank you.
Thank you, Assemblyman. And before I introduce Jennifer Harrison, our final speaker, I would just like to also acknowledge New York State Assemblyman Keith Brown is here as well. So, Assemblyman Brown, thank you. Jennifer Harrison is our final speaker. She's going to be giving an overview of some of the victim stories. Jennifer has dedicated a lot of her time and energy towards this effort with regards to many laws that are either on the books or laws that should be on the books. Jennifer understands victim impact. It's extra personal for her. And I invite her up here to share a few words. Jennifer.
Bail reform and other progressive criminal justice reforms have done the complete opposite of what was sold to us. They haven't made the system more fair or just for anybody. They've only emboldened violent criminals and gangs. Over 21 children in New York City alone have been lost to violence after these deadly progressive reforms have been implemented. 3 people I know were directly affected, and I'm sure that you know people too. The system failed my one-time employee and friend, Amanda Farnham, who lived in constant fear of her brother that was released through a revolving door of the system and ended up killing both her and her father. This broken system failed her and her family. Had William Farnham, her brother, been in custody, not only would he not have been physically able to murder them, but he also would have received some of the help that he so desperately needed. Jonathan Flores Maldonado was a young man in my neighborhood with a bright future. He was the first casualty of bail reform just 13 days after its implementation. And my dear friend Madeline Brown has to watch one of her son's killers walk in and out of court 3 years later after his brutal murder due to bail reform. Her son, Hassan Korea, was an Afghanistan veteran that fought for our country and deserves so much more than to have his killer free 3 years later. I also would like to let you know that my organization, Victims' Rights New York, along with the Victims' Rights Reform Council and Long Island, New York Parents of Murder Victims, have been working with the Long Island Senate Republicans on a Victims' Rights Reform package that will be announced shortly. And I want to thank everybody behind me for standing with victims and standing up against these progressive reforms from day one. We were called fearmongers and liars, and sadly we were right. And somebody here mentioned the lessons that have been learned, but those lessons are not only going to cost these Democrats and progressives their seats, they have cost lives, they have destroyed families, and it has to end immediately. Sadly, Madeline Brown cannot take off any more time for work because she has to take off a lot of time for court dates. But she issued a statement, and Victor Maldonado, Jonathan Flores Maldonado, wanted to be here as well, but he wanted to issue a statement too. This is from Victor Maldonado, Jonathan's father. I would like to have been here to speak out about an egregious law passed in our great state of New York that does not take into consideration the public safety of its constituents or the history of the person being released. The New York State bail reform law. Sadly, my beloved son Jonathan was killed and would still have been alive if it were not for this bail reform law. Lillian and I have lost our beloved son. Victor, Matthew, Jack, and Ashley lost a beloved brother. And the community lost a good, caring, law-abiding young man at the beginning of his promising life with a bright future ahead of him. Who was Jonathan Flores Maldonado? Jonathan Flores Maldonado was an intelligent, caring young man who, in the early hours of Sunday morning, January 12, 2020, while driving an Uber and getting people home safely, was killed because the man who killed him was released on bail reform. Jonathan graduated in May of 2019 with a degree in biology from Buffalo State University. His goal was to work for Doctors Without Borders. danger to the criminal justice system. The killer had 3 prior DWIs, 6 felony convictions, violated parole and probation. Bail reform allowed him to walk right out. Released on a Friday night, in less than 24 hours, my son was dead. Please help me repeal this law. And from Madeline, who once again her son was an Afghanistan veteran who was murdered on the streets of Harlem by a family of violent criminals. One of his alleged killers, Mary Saunders, is still out 3 years later because of bail. My name is Madeline Brand. I am the mother of a homicide victim and the chairwoman of the Victims' Rights Reform Council, a 501c3 organization that advocates for policy legislation and to protect the rights of victims of violent crime. I'm sorry I cannot be with you all today, but I am grateful for allowing Jennifer to read my statement. My son, Sergeant Hassan Faria, U.S. Army retired Afghanistan war veteran, was brutally and savagely stabbed to death by 4 people who did not know nor had he done any harm to. Hassan died at the scene from the fatal stab to his heart. He was stabbed all over his body a total of 9 times. One of the accused is currently free on a drastic bail reduction because of bail reform. She has been free to run and free to kill again for 22 months. No supervision, no ankle bracelet, no monitoring. I am not safe, Hassan's 3 children and wife are not safe, and you are not safe. As I said, we have lost over 21 innocent children in New York City alone to these deadly progressive reforms. The Democrats and the progressives must either stop this insanity, not vote for elder parole, fair and timely parole, or clean sweep, and repeal bail reform, or as we saw last election day, we will vote them out of office. The people are finally starting to listen to us, and we will not stop speaking until it's done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for your words and all your activities and leadership. At this time, any members of the media have any questions?
Lee, I'm curious. Nationwide, there has been a spike in violent crime since the start of the pandemic. I mean, how does that play into the reforms that you're seeking, the end of the reforms that you're seeking?
So here in New York State, we've had a number of changes. The cashless bail law is the highest profile change that people are concerned about, that we're hearing from law enforcement, from prosecutors, their feedback here in the state as to what is causing crime to go up. That is what is most often cited. As I travel the state, I'm having district attorneys referencing cashless bail as the number 1 law that needs to be changed. And I'm hearing it from law enforcement as the number 1 law that needs to be changed. I have prosecutors and law enforcement sharing other perspectives. You heard one example brought up by Senator Matera. I've met with Ithaca DBA a couple of times about their concerns. They use an NYPD cop killer to reimagine their task force. They are seeking to change SWAT where they wouldn't have firearms anymore. That's an Ithaca-specific issue. That would be a very different perspective than maybe some other state or some other part of the country, even some other part of New York. What I've heard from representatives of the NYPD, they cite last year over $1 billion being taken out of their budget. There are attacks on qualified immunity. There are other items that get cited. Our corrections officers, it's high on their mind the prison closures that took place and were announced this week, 6 prisons in the state. Now, I believe that prison populations should be set on whether or not crimes are committed, and if crimes are committed, then laws should be enforced, and that is what ends up determining what our prison population is like. Others believe that it should be determined based off of political whim, political calculation, and you should artificially be adjusting up or down the prison population based off of what polls or political consultants might say. The prison population should be determined based off of whether or not crimes on the books are being violated. So there are other reasons cited in other examples in cities across the rest of the country primarily. There are certainly concerns when you read about what's been happening in Chicago, what's been happening in Minneapolis, what's been happening in Seattle. but here in New York, what we're hearing from the experts is the number one cause of it is cashless bill. Any other questions from the media?
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Lee.